Hey folks, Matt Gladney here, and I'm back with another fantasy map drawing tutorial. This time we'll be going over all sorts of fantasy map features that you could include in your next Dungeons & Dragons fantasy map. We'll be going over how to draw volcanoes, different terrain like deserts, sand dunes, rock formations, chasms, rivers, caves, ocean whirlpools, and shipwrecks. These are all things that I noticed in the comments that you've requested. And I want to thank you so much for the suggestions. All right, let's go sketch. Diving in, I'm going to start with a few volcano designs. I'm going to create a few guidelines for this volcano. And those guidelines are just going to be a triangle shape. And then I'm going to start penciling in the mouth of the volcano. So it's just going to be a bit of a jagged shape. And then I move on to some ridge lines and some texture within the mountainous shape of this volcano. And you're going to see here that I didn't like what I was laying out, so I got my eraser and I started again. And that's the great thing about starting in pencil. Starting again, I just bring down some rough lines all the way around the mouth of the volcano, as well as adding some towards the base. Now let's add an ash cloud. I lightly lay out the rough shape, and then I go in and shape it a bit further. That includes making the line work kind of rough and puffy, as well as I wanted it to look like the ash cloud is sort of trailing away from our perspective. And once I'm happy with it, let's ink it in. Now, typically when I'm doing my fantasy map work, I use the thinnest tip pen that I have. And that's just because we're working with really small stuff. Like this volcano is just a little bit bigger than my thumbnail. And using that fine point tip, I just trace along over top of the pencil guidelines that I laid down. And I press a little bit firmer when I'm doing the actual border lines of the volcano. But once I get in towards those ridge lines, I'm bringing those lines down pretty gently, just to give the image a little bit of dynamic. We don't want it all to be heavy-handed. I feel like it's good to show some of these landmark icons or features in a bit of context on how it would be used on a full map. So I'm gonna add in a bit of a mountain range here to give this a bit of a fuller look of how this would look on a full fantasy map. And if you're looking for some examples on how you could draw mountains for your fantasy map, check out this tutorial I posted where I dive into how you can draw mountains for your fantasy map. All right, that looks awesome. I think that is a great, simple volcano design there. Now let's move on to another design. For the most part, I create my guidelines the same, but with a wider triangle for my guidelines. And you'll see that I added in a few background lines. And that is to sort of give this thick crust to the edge of the volcano's mouth. And then that lower line is gonna be a pool of lava, which I have spilling over and flowing down the volcano. A very similar ash cloud design. As well as this time for context, this volcano is going to be in the middle of a forest. I do have a tutorial video on how I draw trees and forests for fantasy maps. You'll also notice that I add in just a few curved shapes to create a sort of base of this volcano, which I connect one of them with sort of the main ridge line that I added in that first design. Now let's finish that off. Now for my last volcano design, I'm gonna make it even more of the short, wide, magma-filled crater. So we start with a very wide triangular guideline. Pencil in this wide open mouth at about the halfway mark. But I want the crust of the volcano to really be jagged at that craterous mouth. So I create some pretty jagged lines in the background, as well as some smaller ones in the foreground so we can still see that magma pool within. And I also keep that same visual workflow with creating that bit of texture ridge line on the mountainous exterior of this volcano, as well as that sort of same ash cloud look. All right, and I'm happy with it. Let's trace over it with some ink. There's 3 volcano designs that look pretty epic. Now let's carry on with the theme of holes in the earth and move on to our next terrain feature, which is going to be a chasm. To start things off, I'm going to do a very wide, jagged vertical line. And we don't want to perfectly mirror it. We do want those bits of imperfection. And then from each jagged point I can see, I bring down a steep vertical line from it. And this creates the look of the cliff side of this chasm. And then once I've got the shape of this main tear, I'm going to go through and add in some more horizontal offshoots of this fracture. And after that, I'm going to finalize it in pen. Pressing a bit harder for those main lines, but then making sure I lighten up for any of the texture or some of those cliffside lines. Just like that, we were able to create this really awesome dimensional looking chasm. Now let's work on some desert features, starting with some sand dunes. I'm going to start with a wide line that trails down vertically, but this one's going to be a lot more wavy than rough. And then from some of the wavy points, I just do a bit of a curved tail off of that. And as you can see right away, it already gives it that sand dune, sand shelf appearance. And I just carry that down the line. These small curved tails off of each curve on either one of the sides. Now for a little individual dune or sandhill, I make a very rounded, soft triangular shape with no bottom. And then a small curved tail that comes down from the peak. Now let's work on one more sand dune example before we move on. Starting with that really bumpy, mostly horizontal line. Looks like a hill. And then at the crest, I'm just gonna do a very wide, wavy, vertical line downwards. And just those 2 simple lines really sells the look of a sand dune. And most of my line work here with these sand dunes, they're gonna taper from being very soft to as I get to the middle of my lines, I press a bit heavier to get a thicker line. And then as I get to the end, I taper it back down with lighter pressure. That definitely just helps all these lines transition on the paper. Going back into context of how this would all look in a desert map, let's add in a bit of dot work for sand texture. So that's looking pretty deserty. Now let's add some rock formations to really bring it to the next level. So here's a bunch of various rock formation designs. And I usually start them with a bit of a sand dune at the bottom where sand builds up at the foot of these rock formations. But because these are natural formations, I want them to look that way, so nothing is too perfect. So I'm going through and I'm drawing some that double up, some that are wider, shorter, smaller, taller, and some that are kind of like arches with a pathway right through the middle. I feel like one of the important pieces when working on these rock formations is the perspective and angle that they're appearing at. So I like to include a little bit of the visual of the top of each formation. I also like to include some horizontal lines along the formation edges as it gives it that eroded texture. also thought I'd add in a little bit of desert vegetation that you can see here. There's a couple spiky plants and cactus. Now let's get into the desert and let's work on a river feature. This one starts with a wide, vertical, wavy line. It's just gonna sort of be a bit of an abstract S shape. And like the chasm, I'm not mirroring this parallel line. In fact, I want it to be a bit different, which I also do a parallel version. And like the chasm, I'm not mirroring this parallel line. In fact, I want it to be a bit different. So I'm just going around, laying out a bunch of trees, laying out a bunch of bushes, just along the river's edge here. After that, I do a little bit of line work for the flow and current of the water. Now that we've got sort of this river cutting through the forest, one other little feature I'm going to include, a little cave that entices your players on a bit of a side quest. So after I lay out the sort of filled in black triangular shape, I create a few boulders around it, and that's what houses our cave. And with that, let's ink it in. One extra piece I thought I'd add is a little bit of grass texture. So I just go around and just dot that out with small vertical notches at the base of a tree, near the bushes, and around the terrain. Now for the last map feature that I'm going to work on today. I'm going to start with a treacherous whirlpool that could be placed somewhere offshore. So I really just started sketching in this horizontal orientated oval shape, and it just kind of kept getting bigger and bigger, winding it around in layers until I got the desired size I wanted. And then around the border of this whirlpool, I did this bit of pointy line work just to make it look like the water is flowing in a particular direction, in the way that these shapes are sort of pointing. After that, I just add in some stormy looking wave shapes. There we go, we've got a pretty rat-looking whirlpool feature here. Now let's build off of it with some shipwrecks. Now these designs, they can be anywhere. I'm putting them as sort of a graveyard around this whirlpool. But you could put these along the shore, you could put them down below on the ocean floor. They'll work anywhere. So here's a few different examples at various angles of some shipwrecks. This one with the bow pointed up and the stern sunken below the ocean, as well as the masts stripped of their sails. Here's another design where, unlike the first shipwreck, where the stern was angled up, sort of pointed away from us, this one is stern up, angled towards us. And I've got the mast with shredded sails blowing in the wind. And this angle really works because you can see the keel at the center and the hull of the ship. Looks great. Now for this last design is going to have the hull buried beneath the ocean, as well as the stern facing us. Now this design reveals the most of the ship, but with the hull buried beneath the ocean, the empty mass, and the waves crashing into the stern of this boat, it looks like a pretty epic shipwreck. Okay, and there we go. We've got a page full of epic map features here. We've got a series of different volcano designs, each one unique and distinct in its own visual way. We have a deep chasm that's cutting through the earth, a barren desert full of dunes and rock formations, a river cutting through the forest, and a mysterious cave to explore. And finally, a ship graveyard full of wrecks, and a hazardous whirlpool wreaking havoc. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate all the comments, the likes, and the subscriptions to this channel. And please, comment down below and let me know what you want to see next. All right, until next time.